The warrior's unexpected transformation. Grondak the Mighty had always been exactly what his name suggested, a towering ogre warrior whose reputation preceded him across the northern kingdoms. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with arms like tree trunks and a belly that spoke of countless victory feasts, he was the kind of warrior that enemies fled from and allies cheered for. His massive war club, carved from ironwood and studded with metal spikes, had crushed more skulls than he could count in his 30 years of battle. But today, something felt different as he marched through the whispering woods toward the rogue Mage's tower. The mission had seemed straightforward enough: eliminate Zephyrus the Corrupted, a dark mage who'd been terrorizing nearby villages with his hid experiments. The local lord had promised a hefty purse for the job, and Grondak never turned down good coin, especially when it came with the promise of a proper fight. Thunder rumbled overhead as he approached the obsidian spire that jutted unnaturally from the forest floor. Dark energy crackled around its peak, and the very air seemed to thicken with malevolent magic. Grondak spat on the ground and hefted his club. Magic was for cowards and weaklings. Real warriors settled things with steel and strength. The tower's entrance stood wide open, never a good sign. Grondak's warrior instincts screamed danger, but he'd never back down from a fight in his life. He ducked through the doorway, his massive frame barely fitting, and began his ascent up the spiral staircase. The interior walls were lined with grotesque specimens floating in glass containers, failed experiments that made even the battle-hardened ogre's stomach churn. Twisted amalgamations of beast and humanoid stared with lifeless eyes as he passed. Whatever this mage was doing, it was an abomination against nature itself. "So, the great Grondak finally arrives," came a voice from above as he reached the top floor. "I've been expecting you." Zephyrus the Corrupted was not what Grondak had expected. Instead of a frail, robed figure he'd imagined, the mage was tall and lean with wild silver hair and eyes that glowed with unnatural purple light. Dark tattoos writhed across his exposed arms like living serpents, and the air around him shimmered with barely contained power. "Your reputation precedes you, Ogre," Zephyrus continued, raising his hands as arcane symbols began forming in the air around him. "But I'm afraid your journey ends here. I have need of a strong body for my next experiment." Grondak let out a booming laugh that shook the tower windows. "You think your parlor tricks can stop me, wizard? I've crushed 100 of your kind." Without another word, the Ogre Warrior charged. His massive form thundered across the chamber, war club raised high for a devastating overhead strike. But Zephyrus was ready. Dark energy erupted from his fingertips and writhing tendrils that wrapped around Grondak's limbs, slowing his charge. "Too slow, brute," the mage snarled, launching a bolt of crackling energy. Grondak roared and broke through the restraining magic through sheer force of will, but the energy bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He recovered quickly, his warrior training taking over as he adapted his attack angle. The spiked club whistled through the air, forcing Zephyrus to dive aside. The battle raged across the chamber, magical energy clashing against brutal physical force. Grondak's club shattered crystalline equipment and left craters in the stone floor, while Zephyrus's spells scorched the air and walls around them. Neither could gain a decisive advantage, the ogre's raw power countered by the mage's mobility and magical prowess. "You're stronger than I anticipated," Zephyrus panted, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where a stone chip from Grondak's club had grazed him. "But strength alone won't save you from this." The mage raised his staff high and began chanting in a language that predated human civilization. The tattoos on his arms blazed with brilliant light as he channeled power beyond anything he'd used in the fight so far. The very air began to tear apart around him as he prepared what was clearly meant to be a killing blow. Grondak saw his chance. With a warrior's intuition born of countless battles, He hurled his massive war club like a spear just as Zephyrus reached the climax of his incantation. The spinning weapon caught the mage center mass, driving him backward into his own magical apparatus, a complex array of crystals, mirrors, and arcane machinery that hummed with trapped energies. The result was catastrophic. Zephyrus's half-completed spell, meant to obliterate the ogre, instead merged chaotically with the experimental magic contained in his equipment. Reality seemed to hiccup as conflicting energies tore at the fabric of existence itself. The mage screamed as he was consumed by the very forces he tried to control, his body dissolving into streams of pure magical energy, but the chaotic magic wasn't finished. It lashed out wildly, seeking a new target, a new vessel for the transformative power that had been building for months in the tower's arcane machinery. Grondak, standing victorious but exhausted in the center of the chamber, had nowhere to run. The raw magical force struck him like a tsunami of liquid starlight. Every cell in his body screamed as it was torn apart and rebuilt according to patterns and designs he couldn't comprehend. His consciousness flickered like a candle in a hurricane as his very essence was, rewritten by forces beyond mortal understanding. When awareness finally returned, everything was wrong. Grondak tried to push himself up from the chamber floor, but his arms were all wrong too thin, too pale, lacking the familiar bulk and green-tinged skin he'd known his entire life. Panic rising, he staggered to his feet, only to nearly fall as his center of balance had completely shifted. He was shorter, much shorter, and what did you do to me? The voice that emerged from his throat was not his own high, melodious, distinctly feminine. Stumbling to a shattered mirror among the debris, Grondak, or whoever he now was, stared in horror at his reflection. Gone was the massive, green-skinned Ogre Warrior. In his place stood a dark elf woman of stunning beauty, with dusky purple-tinged skin, pointed ears, and silver hair that cascaded past her shoulders. Her figure was lithe and athletic rather than bulky, built for speed and agility rather than brute strength. This isn't possible, she whispered, touching her face with slender fingers. The reflection moved with her, confirming the impossible reality. Somehow, Zephyrus's chaotic magic had not just changed her body, but transformed her very species and gender. As the initial shock began to fade, other changes became apparent. Her senses were sharper now. She could hear sounds from the forest below that would have been inaudible before, and her eyes seemed to pierce the chamber's dim corners with ease. Magic, which had always felt foreign and hostile, now hummed through her veins like a natural part of her being. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come here to destroy a mage who experimented with transformation magic, only to become the ultimate victim of such an experiment herself. But as she examined her new form more closely, she realized something important. She was still herself inside. Her memories, her personality, her warrior's spirit, all intact, just housed in a very different shell. Grondak the Mighty is dead, she said to her reflection, her new voice carrying a note of grim determination. But perhaps someone new can be born from this. As she gathered what remained of her equipment and prepared to leave the ruined tower, the newly transformed dark elf couldn't help but wonder what adventures awaited her in this strange new existence. One thing was certain: life had just become far more complicated.